You ever look back at a single moment in your life and think, that was it? That was the moment everything changed. I do. I remember the exact second, the exact words, the exact feeling that crawled under my skin and refused to leave. Maybe you should do something for yourself. Explore a little. Have fun. That's what he said to me. My husband. So casual. So indifferent. Like it meant nothing. I laughed at first. Brushed it off. But that night, as I lay in bed beside him, staring up at the ceiling in the suffocating silence of our marriage, something inside me cracked. What did he really mean by that? Was it a joke? A test? A sign that he just didn't care anymore? I told myself it was nothing. But you know how some words stick with you? They burrow into your mind and settle in, refusing to leave. That was the beginning. The moment I started seeing my life through a different lens. The way he barely looked at me anymore. The way we'd become strangers, coexisting under the same roof. Sharing a bed, but never really touching. Speaking, but never really talking. And then, there was him. The one I never expected. The one who made me feel seen again. Wanted. Alive. And before I knew it, I had stepped over a line I never thought I'd cross. And my husband? He knew. The way he looked at me the night everything changed, like he had been waiting for it. Like he expected it. And what happened next? That's the part that still haunts me. Because I thought I knew my husband. I thought I knew myself. I was wrong. So tell me, was I selfish? Or was I just human? Stay with me until the end, because this story will make you question everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and the secrets we keep, even from ourselves. There's a moment in every marriage when things start to shift. Not all at once. Not like a big explosion or a dramatic fight. No, it's quieter than that. It sneaks up on you in the small things. The nothing moments. The ones you don't even realize are slipping away until they're already gone. I used to know my husband so well. I used to know what made him laugh, what songs he hummed in the shower, the way he'd brush his fingers against mine absent-mindedly while we sat on the couch watching TV. Now I barely knew the man lying next to me every night. Mark. We had been married for over a decade. Built a life together. A good life on the outside. But if you peeled back the layers, if you really looked, you'd see the cracks. He was a good provider. A responsible man. Successful, ambitious. But somewhere along the way, his work became his priority, and I became background noise. It started small. Missed date nights. Half-hearted nods when I spoke. Intimacy that felt more like an obligation than a desire. Then came the emotional distance. The kind that doesn't show up in arguments or slam doors, but in silence. In the way he'd scroll through his phone at the dinner table. The way he'd turn over in bed without so much as a good night. I can't tell you the last time he really looked at me. I mean, really looked. The way a man looks at a woman he loves. The way a man looks at a woman he wants. And I missed that. More than I wanted to admit. So, there I was. In a house that felt more like a museum of memories, sitting in bed next to a husband who had checked out of our marriage a long time ago, staring at the dim glow of my phone screen, scrolling through pictures of other people living their lives. Laughing, kissing, feeling. I had everything I was supposed to want. A stable marriage. A comfortable home. A predictable, safe life. So why did I feel so invisible? And then, one day, he walked in. Liam. It started so innocently. A familiar face in my social circle. A friend's husband. A guy I had seen at gatherings but never really noticed before. Until, suddenly, I did. He was younger than me. Not by much. But just enough to remind me of who I used to be before life dulled me down. Charismatic. Warm. The kind of man who looked you in the eye when you spoke. Who laughed with his whole body, not just out of politeness. The first time we really talked, it wasn't planned. It was at a mutual friend's gathering. A backyard barbecue. I was refilling my drink when he made a joke about how miserable I looked. I let out the short, bitter laugh because, well, he wasn't wrong. And then he asked, so, what's his excuse? He didn't even have to say Mark's name. I should have been offended. Maybe I was for a second. But then I realized he wasn't mocking me. He wasn't being cruel. He just saw me. And when was the last time anyone had seen me? That conversation? It was only 5 minutes long. But it was enough to plant a seed. Enough to make me notice him. And that's how it always starts, isn't it? Not with some grand, reckless decision. Not with some big, life-altering moment. No, it starts small. A glance that lingers too long. A laugh that feels a little too personal. A casual comment that makes you wonder. It starts with a tiny crack in the foundation. And before you know it, the whole thing starts to break apart. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that my husband was watching. And he was waiting. Waiting to see just how far I'd go. Waiting for me to do exactly what he had already expected me to do. And when the moment finally came, when I did exactly what I swore I never would, his reaction was not at all what I thought it would be. It happened on a night that should have been like any other. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that fills a room when two people have run out of things to say, when conversation feels like a chore rather than a connection. I sat across from Mark, pushing my food around my plate, barely tasting it. He was on his phone, scrolling through emails or news articles or whatever had become more important than our marriage. I don't even know why I said it. Maybe I was looking for a reaction. Maybe I was testing the waters, trying to gauge if there was anything left between us. Or maybe, deep down, I was already looking for permission. I don't know, I sighed, stabbing my fork into a piece of chicken. I just feel stuck. Like we're living the same day over and over again. Mark didn't even glance up. Then maybe you should do something for yourself, he said, still absorbed in whatever was on his screen. Explore a little. Have fun. I blinked. The way he said it, so casual, so indifferent, it felt off. I let out a short, nervous laugh. What's that supposed to mean? He shrugged. Just saying. If you feel stuck, change something. Do what makes you happy. Something about his tone sent a chill down my spine. I studied his face, searching for something. Jealousy? Concern? Even the smallest flicker of emotion? But there was nothing. Just apathy. Like it didn't matter to him at all. I laughed again, lighter this time, trying to brush it off. So, what? You wouldn't care if I just went out and had a little fun? He finally looked up then, but not in the way I expected. His eyes locked onto mine, unreadable. He held my gaze for a second too long, like he was waiting for something. Like he already knew the answer to a question I hadn't even asked. And then, with the faintest, almost imperceptible smirk, he said, I guess we'd find out. My stomach dropped. He went back to his phone, like the conversation was already over. But my mind? My mind wouldn't let it go. Later that night, I lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling while he slept peacefully, his back turned to me. Explore a little. Have fun. What did he mean by that? Was it a test? A trap? A challenge? Or was he really giving me permission? Would he actually not care? And why? Why did that thought hurt more than anything else? I should have let it go. I should have chalked it up to an offhand comment and forgotten about it. But I couldn't, because for the first time in years, I had been handed a possibility. A door had been cracked open, just enough for me to see through to the other side. And once you see something like that, once you imagine what could be waiting for you, it's almost impossible to look away. I told myself I was overthinking it, that it was just a throwaway comment, that Mark was tired, distracted, that he didn't really mean what he said. But once a thought like that burrows into your mind, it doesn't just disappear. It lingers. It festers. It grows. I tried to push it away, to focus on work, on errands, on anything that would keep my mind from circling back to those words. Explore a little. Have fun. But something had shifted. And suddenly, I started noticing things. The way Mark barely looked at me anymore. The way his kisses, when they happened at all, felt obligatory, mechanical. The way he never asked who I was texting, who I was meeting up with, who I was dressed up for when I left the house in something that used to make his eyes linger. I waited for him to say something. To question me. To tease me. To remind me that he still saw me. But he never did. And that was when I realized something that broke me more than anything else. It wasn't just that he wouldn't stop me. It was that he might not even care. I told myself I would never betray him. That I was better than that. That no matter how lonely I felt, no matter how invisible I had become in my own marriage, I would not cross that line. But then came him. It wasn't like I sought him out. I wasn't looking for trouble. But trouble has a way of finding you when you least expect it. Liam. I had seen him around before, at mutual gatherings, through friends. He was charming in a way that felt effortless, the kind of man who always knew exactly what to say to make someone feel comfortable. And unlike my husband, he noticed me. It started small. Little conversations at events. Jokes that made me laugh in a way I hadn't in a long time. And then, one afternoon, everything changed. It was at a coffee shop, one of those cozy, tucked-away places that always smelled like fresh espresso and vanilla. I had gone there alone, just wanting some space, some quiet. And then he walked in. He saw me, smiled, and before I could even think, he was sitting across from me, his coffee in one hand, his eyes locked onto mine like I was the only person in the room. We talked. About nothing. About everything. And then, at some point, he tilted his head, studying me, his expression softening. "You know," he said, stirring his drink absent-mindedly, "you deserve to feel special." My breath caught in my throat. It was such a simple statement. So harmless. So casual. But it hit me like a tidal wave. Because when was the last time someone had said that to me? When was the last time someone had made me feel that way? I should have brushed it off. I should have changed the subject. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, my heart pounding, my fingers tightening around my cup as something inside me cracked wide open. And in that moment, I knew. I was already in trouble. I should have walked away. I should have smiled politely, thanked him for the conversation, and never thought about it again. But I didn't. That night, as I lay beside Mark in the darkness of our bedroom, his back turned to me, his breathing slow and steady with sleep, I picked up my phone. My fingers hesitated over the screen. And then, before I could talk myself out of it, I typed 2 words. "Hey, Liam." I stared at the message for what felt like forever. My heart was racing, my skin felt hot, my stomach tight with something I refused to name. And then, before I could change my mind, I hit send. The response came almost immediately. "Hey, you." A simple reply, but it made my breath catch. It felt intimate, familiar in a way that made me nervous. I locked my phone and placed it face down on my nightstand, trying to ignore the way my heart was pounding. But it was too late. Something had shifted, and there was no going back. At first, I convinced myself it was harmless. A few texts. Light, playful, nothing inappropriate. Just conversation. But soon, I started noticing the little things. Like how I would check my phone every few minutes, waiting for his name to light up my screen. Like how I started dressing differently. Not in a way anyone else would notice. But I noticed. The fitted jeans instead of my usual loose ones. The extra swipe of mascara. The perfume I had stopped wearing because Mark never seemed to notice anymore. And Liam? Liam noticed. The first time he commented on it, we were at the gym. Just another casual run-in, or at least, that's what I told myself. I was on the treadmill, lost in my own thoughts, when he appeared beside me. "Damn," he said with a teasing smirk, "who are you looking this good for?" I laughed it off. But inside? Inside, I felt it. The warmth, the rush. I felt seen. And once you get a taste of that, you start craving it. The gym turned into a coffee date. The coffee date turned into another one. And then, one evening, it turned into something else entirely. I had told myself I wouldn't meet up with him outside of our normal places. That would be crossing a line. But that night, I found myself sitting in his car, parked on a quiet street. It was raining lightly, droplets sliding down the windows, filling the silence between us. Neither of us spoke. Because we both knew. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just another harmless moment. This was something. He reached for my hand. His fingers brushed against mine, just for a second, just enough to send a jolt of electricity through me. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. I turned my hand over, letting my palm press against his, my fingers curling slightly around his own. It was the smallest thing. A touch. Just a touch. But it felt like I had just stepped off the edge of a cliff. That night, when I got home, I couldn't even look at Mark. Not because I felt guilty, but because I didn't. And wasn't that the real problem? I kept telling myself it wasn't really cheating. Not yet. It was just attention. Just feeling wanted. And hadn't Mark given me permission? Hadn't he been the one to say it? Explore a little. Have fun. So why did it feel like I was playing with fire? Why did it feel like something was coming, something I couldn't stop, even if I wanted to? And maybe I didn't want to stop. It was a Wednesday evening. The kind of evening that should have been unremarkable, like every other night before it. I was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, my mind miles away. Thinking about Liam. Thinking about the way his fingers had brushed against mine in his car, the way my skin had burned from such a simple touch. Thinking about how I had not stopped him. Mark was at the table, scrolling through his phone like he always did. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the dishwasher and the occasional clink of silverware. And then, out of nowhere, he spoke. So, I turned my head, my hands still buried in the warm water. He didn't look up from his phone. Didn't change his posture. Didn't even seem to care that he was asking me this at all. Did you take my advice? My breath caught. I froze, the dish slipping from my hands, clattering against the bottom of the sink. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thick. Did you take my advice? I forced myself to turn off the faucet, wiping my hands on a towel, trying to keep my voice steady. What? I asked, playing dumb, because what else could I do? Mark finally lifted his gaze, meeting mine across the kitchen. His face was unreadable. No anger. No accusation. Just curiosity. And that terrified me more than anything else. Explore a little, he said, tilting his head slightly. Have fun. Remember? The way he said it. It wasn't a test. It wasn't a threat. It was something else entirely. A part of me wanted to confess. To tell him that I had already stepped too far into something I didn't understand. But another part of me, one I barely recognized, felt something else. Excitement. Because he knew. And yet, he was waiting. For what? For me to lie? For me to admit it? Or for me to actually do it? I didn't answer him. I couldn't. Instead, I walked past him, feeling the weight of his stare on my back. I went upstairs. I showered. I changed. And that same night, I met Liam. I told myself I wasn't going to let it go too far. That I would meet him, have a drink, talk. Nothing more. But I had been lying to myself for weeks. And the second I saw him, standing there, leaning against his car, a slow smile spreading across his lips the moment our eyes met, I knew. This was it. The moment I crossed the line. It started slow. A drink. A laugh. A shared look that lingered a second too long. Then, his fingers brushing against my wrist as he reached for his glass. Then, the way his gaze dropped to my lips when I spoke, like he was barely holding himself back. And finally, the moment he didn't hold back. We were in his car again, parked in a secluded lot, the city lights glowing faintly in the distance. I should have stopped him when he leaned in. I should have said no when his hands slid up my arms, when his lips hovered over mine, when the space between us disappeared. But I didn't. And when his mouth finally met mine, when the heat of it, the desperation, the sheer rightness of it consumed me, I knew there was no undoing this. This wasn't just a stolen kiss. It was a choice. A choice to break everything I had built. A choice to let it happen. And I did. When I finally made it home, my entire body was still trembling. Not just from what had happened, but from what it meant. From the fact that I couldn't take it back. From the realization that I didn't want to. I slipped inside quietly, locking the door behind me, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Mark was asleep. Or at least, I thought he was. His side of the bed was still. His breathing slow. I exhaled, relieved. But as I reached for my phone to set it on the nightstand, the screen lit up. A message. From Mark. We need to talk. I felt the blood drain from my face. I turned my head slowly, my breath catching. And in the dim glow of the bedroom, I saw it. Mark's eyes. Wide open. Staring at me. Silent. Waiting. I couldn't move. My phone felt heavy in my hand, the glowing words, "We need to talk," searing into my mind like a brand. Mark's eyes were open. Watching me. Not angry. Not confused. Just waiting. The air in the bedroom thickened, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Mark, what?" "Sit down," he said. I hesitated. My legs felt weak as I lowered myself onto the edge of the bed, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Mark sat up slowly, resting his elbows on his knees, rubbing his hands together like he was working through something in his mind. And then, without looking at me, he said it. "I saw you." The words knocked the air from my lungs. A sharp, painful silence settled between us. My body locked up, my breath shallow, every muscle frozen in place. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to deny it. But I couldn't, because he wasn't asking. He knew. I opened my mouth, grasping for words that wouldn't come. My mind raced, flashing through every possible scenario. Had he followed me? Had someone told him? Or worse, had he known all along? Mark finally turned to face me, his eyes dark, unreadable. And then, he said something I never expected. "Tell me, was it worth it?" His voice was calm, almost too calm. Not sharp, not filled with betrayal or rage. There was something else in it. Something unsettling. Like he needed to know. Like he had been waiting for this moment. My lips parted, but I had no answer. Was it worth it? Was it? I thought of Liam. The way he touched me, the way he made me feel. I thought of Mark, how distant he had been, how he had practically pushed me toward this. I thought of how I had spent years trying to be seen, only to realize I had already disappeared. And for one terrifying second, I didn't feel guilty. I felt relieved. That scared me more than anything else. Mark studied me, his gaze flicking over my face like he was searching for something. Then, finally, he leaned back against the headboard and exhaled slowly. And for the first time, I saw it. Not anger. Not heartbreak. But relief. Relief. A cold shiver ran through me. What do you mean?" I whispered. Mark let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. I knew this would happen eventually. I flinched. His words cut deeper than if he had screamed at me. "Knew what would happen?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. His eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something raw beneath the surface. Not love. Not pain. Acceptance. Like this had been inevitable. Like he had been waiting for it. Mark ran a hand through his hair, sighing. I just needed to know for sure. A sick, uneasy feeling twisted in my stomach. Know what for sure? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, grabbed his phone from the nightstand, and walked toward the door. Then, just before stepping out, he turned his head slightly over his shoulder and said, "Now we're even." The floor tilted beneath me. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. The bedroom door clicked shut behind him, leaving me sitting there, staring at the empty space where he had just been. My hands were shaking. My mind was racing. I had no idea what to do with what I had just heard. What did he mean? Now we're even? My pulse thundered in my ears as the realization crashed over me like a tidal wave. Mark hadn't lost me, because he had never truly been mine to begin with. He had known. He had expected it, because he had already done the same. And suddenly, the betrayal I had been running from wasn't just my own. It was his too. My stomach twisted as nausea rolled through me. Had I fallen right into his plan? Had he been waiting for this, wanting this? And worse, had he been doing the same thing all along? How long had Mark been keeping his own secrets? I sat there for what felt like hours, frozen, staring at the empty space where Mark had been just moments ago, replaying his words over and over in my head. Now we're even. A quiet, detached statement. No anger. No pain. Like he had been expecting this. Like it wasn't even a surprise. And that was what rattled me the most. Not that I had betrayed my husband. Not even that he knew. But that I hadn't been the first to do it. I had been so sure that I was the one who had ruined us. That I was the one who had taken the first step across the line. But Mark had already been there, waiting for me on the other side. For how long? Had he been cheating for months? Years? Was this some kind of twisted revenge? Had he wanted me to do this? To justify something he had already done? Had he set me up? The thought made my stomach churn. I felt sick. Not just because of what I had done, but because, for the first time, I saw my husband as a stranger. The man I had once trusted with everything, the man I had built a life with, a future with, was sitting downstairs in the same house as me, carrying secrets I couldn't even begin to unravel. And the worst part? I didn't know if I even wanted to. Because if I knew, if I asked, then I would have to face the truth. And I wasn't sure I could handle it. I kept replaying that night at the dinner table. The moment he had told me to explore a little. Have fun. Had he already known back then? Had he already done it by then? Had he been giving me permission? Or had he just been watching? Waiting? Would he have even said anything if I had never acted on it? Or had this all been exactly what he expected? A bitter taste filled my mouth. I had spent so long feeling neglected, feeling invisible, aching for someone to see me again. And the moment I reached for that, the moment I let myself feel again, I realized I was just playing a role in a story that Mark had already written. I thought I had been making my own choices. But what if I was just walking straight into the path he had left open for me? And if that was true, what did that make me? I wanted to feel guilty. I should feel guilty. A part of me did. But there was something else too. Something darker. Something I didn't even want to admit to myself. I had spent so long feeling like an afterthought in my own marriage. Like I was the only one who still cared. And that night with Liam? It had felt good. It had felt like mine. And now, knowing that Mark had already done the same, maybe even worse, wasn't I just evening the scales? Hadn't he done this first? Hadn't he let me rot in silence while he got whatever he needed elsewhere? Hadn't he wanted this to happen? Was I really the villain in this story? Or was I just finally taking back something that had been taken from me a long time ago? I stood up slowly, my body heavy, like I had aged 10 years in one night. I walked to the bathroom, gripping the edges of the sink, staring at my reflection under the cold, dim light. My face looked the same. Same eyes, same lips. But I didn't recognize myself. Who was I now? A wife? A cheater? A fool? Or something else entirely? I thought about Mark, about the man I had married, the man who had once been my best friend. And I realized, with a deep, aching certainty, I no longer knew him. But worse than that, I no longer knew myself. I stood there, gripping the cold porcelain of the sink, staring at my reflection, but I wasn't really looking at myself. I was looking at the woman I used to be. The woman who believed in love. The woman who thought marriage was built to last, who thought trust was something unshakable, something permanent. The woman who had convinced herself that her husband, the man she had built her life around, would always be hers, no matter what. But now I knew better. Or maybe I knew worse. Because the truth was, I didn't know anything anymore. Not about him. And definitely not about myself. I thought back to the way Mark had looked at me. The way he had asked me if it was worth it, not with anger, not even with pain, but with something else entirely. Like he had already been waiting for my answer. Like he already knew it. And that shook me to my core. So I have to ask you, anyone watching this, anyone listening to my story, have you ever been in a moment where you thought you knew your partner, only to realize you didn't? When you look at the person sleeping next to you at night, the person you promised forever to, can you say, with absolute certainty, that you know what's in their heart? Because I couldn't. Not anymore. And now I can't stop asking myself, did Mark set me up? Was this some kind of test? A twisted way to justify something he had already done? Or was he simply so detached, so gone from our marriage that it didn't even matter to him? Was his indifference a sign that he had stopped loving me a long time ago? Or was it something darker? Did he want this? Did he need me to do it so he could finally say, see, you're no better than me? Because if he did, then maybe we were both villains in this story. Or maybe we were just two people who had lost each other so completely that we didn't even know how to find our way back. I keep asking myself, was I selfish? Or was I just finally listening to what I needed? Maybe there is no right answer. Maybe love isn't as simple as we were told it would be. Maybe some betrayals are inevitable. I want to know what you think. Tell me, was this fate? Or was it a choice? Was Mark playing a game? Or was he already so far gone that nothing could have stopped this? And if you were me, what would you have done? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because right now, I don't even know how to answer for myself. We think we understand love. We think it's a promise, a contract written in invisible ink, unbreakable. We think trust is something solid, something we can build a life on, something that, no matter how much time passes, will always hold steady beneath our feet. But sometimes, the most shocking part of betrayal isn't the act itself. It's realizing that maybe, just maybe, it was never betrayal at all. Maybe it was just the truth we refused to see for so long. The truth that our love was never as unshakable as we thought. The truth that trust isn't permanent. It's fragile. It's conditional. It can dissolve in the space between two people who have let too much time, too much distance, too much silence settle between them. I spent so long blaming myself, thinking I had been the one to break us, thinking I had been the one to step out of bounds, the one who let desire, loneliness, and need lead me into something I couldn't take back. But now I wonder if Mark ever really saw what happened as a betrayal at all. If what I did was even something worth forgiving. Or if, to him, it was just the inevitable outcome of a story that had already been written long before I made the choice to cross that line. Maybe that's what scares me the most. Not that I was caught. Not that he knew. But that he expected it. That he had been waiting for it. That, in some twisted way, it had completed something for him. Because when he looked at me and said, "Now we're even," it wasn't with pain. It wasn't with anger. It was with relief. Like it had set him free. And if that's true, then maybe our marriage wasn't built on love at all. Maybe it was built on something else. Something far more complicated. Something neither of us had the courage to admit. And now, as I sit here, staring at my own reflection, I wonder, what happens next? Do we stay in this marriage, pretending we can rebuild something that might have been cracked from the start? Or do we walk away, knowing that neither of us is innocent, that neither of us is a victim, that what we've done to each other is just human nature in its rawest, most painful form? I wish I had an answer. But I don't. Not yet. And that is a story for another time. If you've made it this far, tell me, is love just an illusion we hold onto because we're too afraid to face the truth? Or is it real, and we're just too flawed to keep it alive? Let me know in the comments. Because right now, I don't know what to believe anymore.